was.
Welcome back. Tonight's theme is school. A place most of us remember as ordinary, even boring. But the stories I have for you tonight suggest otherwise. Some of you may want to keep the lights on. I'll leave that decision to you. There's something deeply wrong about being known by someone who shouldn't know you. A stranger in front of a classroom, your name in their mouth. This is their account. The substitute teacher already knew my name before I sat down, and she hadn't looked at a seating chart. It was a Wednesday in early October, the kind of gray morning where the sky never quite wakes up, that flat, colorless light that makes everything look slightly overexposed, slightly wrong. The hallways smelled like floor wax and damp jackets. I was running late to AP English, so I slid into my usual seat near the back without making eye contact with anyone, dropping my bag with a dull thud that I immediately regretted. The woman standing at the front was thin, professionally dressed, maybe late 40s. She had a calm face, pleasant even. She was writing the day's agenda on the whiteboard, the marker moving in slow, deliberate strokes that made almost no sound at all. Without turning around, she said my full name. First, middle, last. She told me she was glad I could make it. I assumed she'd been briefed. Teachers do that sometimes, flag the students worth watching, pass along a note about the one who sits in the back and says very little. I let it go. The lesson was on unreliable narrators. She was engaged, articulate, the kind of speaker who doesn't fill silence with noise but lets it sit until it means something. Students liked her. I found myself listening closely, the way you do when someone holds a room without effort, without asking for it. It was during the discussion that I noticed the first thing. She would answer questions before students finished asking them. Not close guesses. Not reasonable predictions. The exact question, word for word, completed and answered before the sentence was done. Tyler started to ask something about Poe, and she finished his thought with a precision that made him laugh nervously and say, "Yeah, exactly that." His voice had a strange edge to it, like he wasn't entirely sure whether to be impressed or unsettled. Everyone assumed she was just sharp. I kept watching. By the end of class, she had done it 11 times. I counted. The sound came from directly behind my chair, though the wall was 3 feet away, and there was nothing there to shift or settle. When the bell rang and the room emptied, chairs scraping, voices spilling out into the corridor, I hung back. The room felt different with no one in it. Smaller, quieter, the overhead lights buzzing faintly in a way I hadn't noticed before. I told her I thought the lesson was interesting. She said she knew I would. I started to ask what she meant by that, and she turned to face me fully before I'd finished the sentence. She said my middle name. Quietly. Just that, in the same tone someone uses when they've known you a long time. Then she said, "You were going to leave after the 10th. My middle name is not on any school record. It was my grandmother's name." I had been thinking about her that morning, specifically that morning, for a reason I have never told anyone and am not going to tell anyone now. I asked the substitute who she was. She looked at me for a long moment, the lights buzzing, the room completely still. She smiled. "I know," she said. Nothing else. I left quickly. I went straight to the main office and asked who had arranged the substitute. The secretary pulled up the records and frowned at her screen, clicking through twice as if the answer might change. There was no substitute booked for that class. No record, no request, no name. I walked back to the room. Empty. Chairs straight. Whiteboard clean. No chalk residue, no eraser smear, nothing to suggest anything had been written there at all. I stood in the doorway for a while, not quite willing to go in. For the rest of that day, something sat in my chest the way a sound does after it stops. Present without being locatable. Wrong without being nameable. Like a frequency just below what you can consciously hear, but that your body registers anyway. Tightening slightly around it without knowing why. I spoke to 4 other students from that class later that afternoon. They all remembered the lesson. They all remembered the woman. Not one of them could describe her face. I still can't either. I've tried. It won't come. That story still unsettles me in ways I struggle to explain. But the next account is grounded in something far more immediate. A threat that had a face and a pattern and a very deliberate patience. Sometimes it isn't what happens inside a building that stays with you. Sometimes it's what waits outside every single day without fail. Here's what they told me. He was in the same parking spot every Tuesday, engine running. No one visibly inside. Our high school had an open student lot, poorly lit, positioned behind the gymnasium where the security cameras pointed the wrong way. The asphalt back there was cracked and uneven, the overhead lights spaced too far apart, leaving long stretches of shadow between them. In winter it got dark before 5. I was 17 and working late most Tuesdays on the school paper, so I was often among the last students to leave the building. The hallways would go quiet in a way that felt different from daytime quiet, heavier somehow, more deliberate. I noticed the gray sedan first, because it was always running. Exhaust curling white in the cold air. I assumed it was a parent waiting for a kid in late practice. That was the reasonable explanation, and I held on to it for longer than I should have. By the third week, I paid closer attention. The car was always in the same row, same space, parked nose in against the chain-link fence at the far end. It was always there when I arrived after school and still there when I left, often after 7 in the evening. The engine sound was low and constant, almost like breathing. I mentioned it to Ms. Hargrove, our faculty advisor. She nodded and said she'd keep an eye out. I don't think she did. In week 4, I started varying my exit route. I'd leave through the front entrance and cut around the building rather than walk straight through the lot. The long way added 5 minutes and took me past the dumpsters and the smell of wet concrete, but it felt better than that open stretch of dark asphalt. On the second time I did this, I glanced back from the corner of the gym. The sedan had moved, closer, idling near the main walkway. I felt the cold move up my back in a single slow wave. Not from the air, from the understanding. That was the moment I stopped rationalizing. I told my older brother, who started picking me up on Tuesdays. The car was still there, still in the lot. My brother confirmed it without me prompting him. He saw it before I said anything, and his jaw went tight in a way that told me I hadn't been imagining things. We wrote down the plate number. I brought it to the vice principal, who promised to contact the district safety officer. A week passed. Nothing visible changed. Then on a Tuesday in late November, I forgot my laptop and went back inside alone. When I came out, my brother's car was still 10 minutes away. The sedan was parked directly behind mine, engine running, and for the first time the driver's window was fully down. The air smelled like exhaust and cold pavement. I stood very still. I could not see a face. I could only see an arm resting on the door and a phone held up, its screen facing me, its camera facing me. Neither of us moved for what felt like a long time. Then I called my brother. I went back inside. I stood in the lit lobby with my back against the wall where I could see both the parking lot and the inner hallway, and I stayed there until his headlights pulled up. We reported it again, with the photo I managed to take from behind the glass door. The plate came back registered to a rental company. After that, the trail went cold. The officer who followed up 2 weeks later told me, without quite meeting my eyes, that there was nothing more he could do. I told him I understood. I'm not sure either of us believed that. For a while afterward, I had trouble sleeping on Monday nights. Just Mondays. My brain doing its own kind of accounting. I never found out who it was. I don't work late on Tuesdays anymore. Some threats wear human faces, and some don't wear faces at all. This final account comes from a teacher, not a student, and she sent it to me with the note that she has never spoken about it out loud. Most schools are mapped, numbered, accounted for. Every room has a purpose. Every door leads somewhere familiar. Most schools. Here is what they found. My classroom wasn't on the school's floor plan. Nobody could tell me why. The building was old, a 1960s structure with several additions stitched onto it over the decades, so architectural oddities were normal. Long, dead-end corridors, stairwells that didn't connect to the floor above, doors that opened onto blank walls. Room 114 was at the far end of the east wing, past the custodial storage and the old kiln room that hadn't been used since ceramics was cut from the curriculum. It took me 20 minutes to find it on the first day. The hallway leading to it was narrower than the others, the overhead fluorescents spaced further apart so the light came in uneven pools, with stretches of dim gray between them. The hallway smelled like chalk dust and something faintly sweet underneath, not pleasant, more like something left too long in a warm room. Overripe. Enclosed. My classroom was serviceable. Old desks with initials scratched into the surfaces. Good light from tall windows along the south wall. A chalkboard instead of a whiteboard. I liked it, actually. It felt separated from the noise of the main building. Quiet in a way that felt intentional, almost cushioned. My students liked it too. We settled into a rhythm by the third week. The strangeness began so gradually I didn't register it as strangeness at first. Students would occasionally pause mid-sentence, just for a moment, eyes shifting toward the back corner of the room. Not the door, not the window. The corner where two walls met above the old heating unit, where the paint had yellowed and a thin crack ran from ceiling to baseboard. When I asked what they were looking at, none of them could say. They'd blink, shake their heads slightly, return to whatever they'd been doing. One girl said she kept thinking she heard someone clear their throat. Softly, like someone trying not to be noticed. I stayed late one Friday to mark papers. Around 6 o'clock, the building went quiet in that particular way old buildings do. A thick, pressurized silence that settles into the walls and the floor and sits there. The kind of quiet that makes every small sound. A pen set down, a chair shifting, feels slightly too loud. The corridors outside had stopped their distant murmuring. The ventilation had cycled off. The temperature had dropped near the back of the classroom. Not a draft. There was no movement in the air at all. The heating unit was warm to the touch when I checked it. The cold was coming from the corner itself, radiating outward from the wall in a way that felt measured, deliberate. I stood there with my hand near the plaster, close but not touching, even and steady, like standing near something that breathes. I told myself it was the age of the building. Old plaster, poor insulation, a gap somewhere behind the wall. I told myself that several times on the drive home. I mostly believed it. I went to the main office the following Monday and asked the head secretary to pull the room history. She looked at the number I'd written down and was quiet for a moment. She told me 114 had been sealed in 1987. A student had been found there on a Monday morning, sitting upright at a desk in the back corner, facing the wall. He had been there since Friday. 3 days. No food, no water. Completely silent. The room had been locked from the outside the entire weekend, and no one could explain how he had gotten in. He wasn't injured. He didn't speak for 6 weeks afterward. When he finally did, he said only that he had been listening. The room was sealed the same month. She did not know how it had returned to the assignment schedule. She did not know who had put my name to it. Her expression was careful in a way that told me she wasn't going to say anything further. I was moved to a different classroom the following week. Brighter, warmer, closer to the main corridor. I was grateful for the noise, but 3 of my former students stopped by before the end of term. Separately, without coordinating. Each one asked me, in their own words, whether I had ever figured out what was standing in the corner. I told them nothing was standing there. None of them looked convinced. I'm not sure I was either. 3 stories, 3 schools. None of them places I'd want to return to. If any of this felt familiar, If something about tonight sat a little too close, I'd be curious to hear why. Stay safe out there. I'll see you next time.